Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Live Show Podcast Network. My name is Tyrone Brown Jr., and I am your host for this evening. I just want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight for this special interview. We have a person that is an author. But before we get to our special guest, I want to say thank you to all of our continuing and continued supporters, people that continue to share, to like, to comment, to love us. For all of our followers that are on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch, on Instagram, as well as Facebook, thank you so much. Even for those of you that are going to our website, which is www.thelifeshowpodcast.com. Look, ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful tonight to have our special guest, author and published writer, Richard Meehan. And I want to first by welcoming you. How are you doing, Richard?
Doing great, and I appreciate being on your show, Tyrone.
Definitely. Well, I just want to get some opening things about you, and we're going to, launch this interview to see where it all started from, where you grew up, what's your roots, and then we can start from there and start escalating.
Very well. Well, to start off, I'm from Spartanburg, South Carolina, pretty much the deep South. Been here all my life. Went to school here, went to Wofford College as my final finish, and worked for a family business for the last 40 years up until the year of COVID.
Okay. Wow. So the family business, what does that entail? What does that involve?
We were a manufacturer of detergents and a seller of cleaning supplies to the janitorial maintenance industry.
Wow.
Sales and marketing all those years. So,
wow. So, was that, from when you were little, and how did you, how did that go?
oh, my dad started the company in '68. He was a chemist. We made detergents based on his formulas. He passed in '91. It's still been a family business ever since. My mother still
Nice.
the show.
Good deal. Well, I asked all of that to see, the humble beginnings. Nobody ever understands, when you start something, that you have to go all the way through. You can't just get in midstream and just quit. But your dad started the business. And then, of course, after he passed, what happened to the business?
Oh, business has been thriving ever since. I'm afraid that
Nice.
even though COVID wasn't a great thing for most, we manufactured disinfectants. So cleaning maintenance became a big thing all of a sudden.
Okay.
Glad to say that it helped us. Not many people it helped, but you're looking at one. What can I say?
That's awesome. Well, again, look, ladies and gentlemen, you are listening and viewing the Live Show Podcast right here on the Live Show Podcast Network. My name is Tyrone Brown Jr., and I'm the host for the show tonight. I wanted to make sure that everyone knew and understood who Richard is. And, he came to us via my good friend, and just a solid connection to where we got everything put together for the interview. And I'm excited about it. I really am. I'm excited about the interview. Actually, Steve Joyner is the one that really hooked us up. And Steve he's a phenomenal guy that's doing a lot of work in the publicist field. And he is the reason why, of course, Richard and we are online tonight doing this interview. So I want to get into COVID and how it affected not just business, but how it affected you personally.
Well, let me take a tiny step backwards and mention that all during my regular career, I was a writer. I wrote for many magazines, newspapers.
Yeah.
I have not had the time to write books. Books take a bit more effort to put together. So what that did for me was not only did younger family come into the business, I got to semi-retire. So during the COVID season, I wrote a couple of books, and I'm glad for that time, actually.
Good deal. So the book that you started that started in the midst of the pandemic, what was it about?
Okay. Well, I'm going to hold it up here for you. This is called Ducktail.
Yeah.
It was more or less a memoir of growing up in Spartanburg and South Carolina in general. But my dad was kind of a phenomenal dad. He had a lot of wisdom to pass on. He was a duck hunter and had a cadre of friends that were duck hunters, and I had to grow up with them because if I wanted to be with him, I was going to be in a duck swamp somewhere. And South Carolina is known for being a swampy land. So a lot of that was spent at Santee Cooper in the lower part of the state.
Nice.
But what this book has in it for folks is really a growing up, coming of age tale with a lot of Southern humor and Southern happenings. So it would be a good gift for a lot of folks. I would say teenagers and older.
Wow.
The next book that came along, this one only took 30 years worth of sitting on a shelf before I could get it written.
So you wrote it, and then it sat up on the shelf for 30 years, and then you reached up in the middle of the pandemic and said, "It's time to go."
It is. That is exactly what I did.
Nice. So what pushed you? What pushed you to say, "Well, now's the time"? During the pandemic, what pushed you to do that?
Stuck at home. Stuck at home, so I couldn't stand just sitting in front of a blank screen.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I also, before we get to the next book, I also want to ask you how it felt going through the pandemic, and how were you affected personally during the pandemic?
Well, what I mentioned earlier is that we worked pretty hard to make sure that our clients had the required materials for disinfecting their buildings, making sure their personnel were trained in order to meet the regulations and whatnot. So it was quite a busy time for our business. But once I actually got locked down, I found that I had time on my hands. Now, that's the one crazy thing about the computer and all these new Zoom meetings and things like what we're doing right now kind of just happened. So
Definitely.
I'm pleased about technology. If you had asked me 40 years ago how computers would affect my sales, I would have said computers, teleconferencing, none of that is ever going to affect sales. You get in front of people and you talk to them and you smile and you be nice and you go and
Yeah.
see them. That's the main thing. What can I say? I was wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, the way that it affected us is just that, as you were saying, we were stuck in the house. And of course, the idea came about several months before the pandemic, that maybe we should, start a podcast. And of course, I was not familiar with the format. But as I began to do a little research and kind of study up on what it was about, then of course we launched in July of 2020, and we have been going ever since. To this point, of course, we've gone to the next level, and to the next level, and to the next level, until we arrived to where we are now. But if you go back in the beginning, July 8th of 2020, you will see that it was not like this. It was not like this. We started off in our kitchen, in our not in our kitchen, but in our dining room, and it quickly moved within a year. Within a year's time, it quickly moved from our dining room to our own studio, to where now we could house guests, especially if they were local. And so, but I'm very intrigued by what people went through during the pandemic, what they thought, and what their concerns were. Did you have any major concerns even during COVID?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I'm one of the founding members of the Spartanburg Community Band. We started in 1996. We're an 80-person symphonic group. I play the saxophone. Now, the first thing that happened when the pandemic hit was one of the biggest concerts we'd ever planned had to be canceled 2 days after COVID hit. So, um, for almost a year, the band members were not able to play. So there was
Yeah.
your concern as to whether we were going to have a band when we got back, because the Spartanburg Community Band is all volunteer.
Got
And
it.
the audience that comes does not have to pay for a quality music concert.
Yeah.
So the new deal that arose from all this is that folks that were real video savvy were able to
Yeah.
start putting together concerts, taking individual videos and pasting them together. So we actually
Wow.
a Zoom concert. I, I, I have no idea how many hours were put into melding all those videos together to make a concert, but it happened,
I
and
bet.
we did it a couple of times.
Wow. That's really cool.
Sorry.
That's really cool that you guys took that time during the middle of the pandemic to really kind of warm the hearts of those that were still sitting in the house. And that's what community is all about. Banding together, literally banding together, so that you can create something that will work for other people. And so, even after the first book, what launched your second book?
Well, let me say one last thing on that. One of my
Sure.
dad's witticisms was, "Where there's a will, there's a way." So
That's
people all over the world made things happen despite
Yeah.
the old flu.
Yeah, definitely.
Once I got done with the first book, though, I got to go into my favorite type of writing, which is fiction.
Okay.
And historical fiction specifically, this book called Ford the Packlet is also a large number of years of research that sat in my
Yeah.
file cabinet. So I was able to paste together a true story in a historical fiction format. In the Southern campaign of the American Revolution, in the years between 1780 and 81, there was a major battle called the Battle of Cow Pens. It was the turning point of the American Revolution.
Yeah.
And that the local folks here in Spartanburg, in our county, were the ones that mainly fought that battle. But what the story tries to remind folks of is that the American Revolution was literally a civil war.
Yeah.
We were fighting here in my community, neighbors with neighbors, fathers
Wow.
with sons, even the daughters were fighting in the revolution in various ways. So I tend to want to remind folks of what the sacrifices were for our liberty.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a lot of sacrifice, especially, from the area that you're in. What is some of the brief history of that battle and what triggered it?
Well, the Continental Army was being directed by several folks, but the book focuses on the militia leader, General Daniel Morgan. One of the properties that my father and I helped put together was a property called Grindle Shoals Sportsman's Club. It's about 14 miles from where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
And the club still exists today. Family's still part of it. But the property, the several hundred acres on the Packlet River, the Fort Packlet, the 700 acres is up against one of the major fords, the places to be able to cross the river. Both the Continental Army and the British Legion crossed that ford in January of 1781. And the small Grindle community, being a bunch of frontier folks, well, it kind of wiped them out. I mean, they were trying to feed and supply Daniel Morgan's army on the Patriot side. And in a small community, they just took everything, took all the things to eat, food, clothing. Now the British Legion coming along also, well, they took everything else that was left behind. So the community of Grindle Shoals disappeared off the face of the planet.
And that is crazy. How does something like that happen? Grindle Shoals just like up and disappears. Like, how does that happen?
Well, in the frontier, there were no bridges. So when you wanted to cross a stream, you had to ford it. So that meant the armies had to cross somewhere, and Grindle's was the perfect location. There were only 3 fords on the Packlet River within, an area of about 30 square miles. So that made Grindle's a community for trade. For the 10 years prior to the war, the residents moved in, they just got settled, they had started trading, they had borrowed money, they'd brought in supplies, they had a store, there was a trading post, they had a grist mill for grinding wheat and whatnot for food. All that was gone after the army passed through.
So it was either stolen or it was just left for spoils?
Well, the residents, for the most part, were termed Whigs. They were the patriots that we like to call
Okay.
the folks that wanted to be a free country and not
Yeah.
under the yoke of, King George III.
Yeah.
Now, the British Legion and their Tory followers, the loyalists to the king, they weren't very happy about losing their colonies.
Yeah.
So we were not lenient on Whigs. Whigs had to fight back. There were many atrocities on both sides, but it was mainly Tories stealing everything they could get their hands on to prevent the Whigs from being able to fight back.
Wow. And so now here it is, several years later. Now you write a book on the history of it. Did you get any pushback from anyone in the community that may have, kind of disliked, what the history said or anything like that?
Well, part of what goes along with the American Revolution all the way up through the Civil War, from the time America was colonies, is that we used slave labor, enslaved people,
Yeah.
to farm, and that did not change up until the end of the Civil War, of course. Um, but when you have a frontier community of poor dirt farmers, uh,
Yeah.
the particular family that's mentioned in this book is a great, for instance. They actually borrowed money in order to purchase several peoples to work the farm. So,
Okay.
what that really means is they had to treat their slaves well. They had to have
Okay.
doctors. They had to feed them, clothe them, house them. Uh, didn't want those slaves to be unhappy because then they might want to leave or fight back. And
That's good.
that's a fact. So in this particular family, though, I would have to say they were an example of not all slaves were treated poorly.
Yeah.
There were atrocities. It was wrong to have slaves in the first place, but it was a
Mhm.
way of life.
Yeah.
So I would say also on that score that when the Declaration of Independence was written with the words, all men are created equal,
Yeah.
that changed a lot of hearts.
Yeah.
And in the upstate of South Carolina, where a group of Presbyterian ministers
Okay.
that have begun talking about slavery not being in line with what the new
Right.
country should be like.
Yeah.
So my character, the main character in the book, the son of the owner of the trading post, uh, begins to think along those lines as the book progresses.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to say all that is over and behind us.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, here it is now. I just want to say, here is Spain is checking in. Thank you so much, Original Magazine. Um, I just want to say again, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Life Show podcast. My name is Tyrone Brown Jr., and I am the host of the Life Show Podcast Network. Um, Tonight, we have a special individual that is here interviewing with us. And he is an author, he is a historian, and a businessman. You can't get much better with that combination. So, um, well, to be honest, I love history because, in history, you find out what mistakes you made and then you capitalize, or you're supposed to capitalize on the mistakes so they don't continue to be mistakes.
Yeah.
Here, here it is. Richard, he's written several books. Of course, the first one he had, tucked away, then the pandemic hit, and then he pulled it off the shelf and, put it into print, so that it could be, an encouragement during the pandemic. And then the next book talks about the history of Grendel Shoals and where things started and how things are formatted or were formatted during that time. And it was during slave labor. Richard, even in that time, do you have testimonials of some of the people that were there in the midst of it?
There are quite a number of stories. We have archives. If you're referring to slave narratives, where they were recorded, and people can look them up easily to see what was said. I've got a book on my desk right now. One of the coolest stories that I've been working on for my next book, it's actually the prequel to Ford the Packlet. If the audience will notice, Ford the Packlet culminates in the Battle of Cowpens. That was January of 1781. But it's an award-winning book, and a lot of people have requested that I do the year prior to the Battle of Cowpens and the year after. They want to know what happens.
Yeah.
I'm real pleased to be asked to do that, and so I'm working on both a prequel and a sequel at the same time, using the same trading family.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, one of the coolest stories is about Brattonsville. Brattonsville was named after the family of Bratton that lived in York County, South Carolina, in 1780. They had a plantation.
Okay.
The Colonel Bratton was one of the Whig fighters against the British, big leader in the upstate of South Carolina. And the he was on the hit list of the British Legion. They wanted him really bad.
Yeah.
But without going into a whole lot of detail about what happened on one particular summer day in July, there was an incident where the British Army showed up at his doorstep, and the people that were home were his wife, his daughters, and his 6-year-old son. 6-year-old son wrote a witness statement several years after the war. He eventually became a doctor, an MD. But thanks to him, we have an idea of what happened on that particular day when the British Army came to Colonel Bratton's farm. And his wife had been threatened with a wheat cleaving hook, a scythe, rather. She had just come in from the fields cutting wheat. And she and her son were on the porch when the British Legion showed up at her doorstep and demanded to know where her husband was. So as soon as they thankfully left her alone, she sent her young boy slave, Watt, on horseback to a nearby camp where the Whigs were forming up. There were about 500 men formed up about 14 miles away. And the very next day they came and they took care of the British problem. So if you want to know about the defeat of Huck, Huck, you can look that up online. Huck's defeat will tell you the entire tale. It was a
That's
good one.
awesome. Like I said, I love history. Um, Again, history shows us, all of the mistakes that have been made, throughout life as it is. And now, to really look into history to see what happened, why it happened, and where it happened, it really puts me into the mind frame of correcting things before they get out of hand. And I like to do things beforehand, before, it even happens, to prevent rather than to, get in the heart of it and then try to do something about it then. I am a prevention kind of guy. But, I really liked how the book laid out the history part of it, and looking into what was going on then, and you know I'm starting to see some similarities of then and now, and it is remarkable to see the similarities. It really is, because it actually takes you from the point of where things happen and to where things kind of progressed in that time. And so, but I'm appreciative. Thank you so much for outlining, history and doing your research, because it really helped me with the storyline.
Well, thank you. I would like to
De-
say that as far as history repeating itself, we all know is a poor thing, but it comes from not being taught history in the first place.
Yep.
One of the reasons that I'm working on these books is that there's an interest in eighth grade classrooms with the Common Core alignments to help teachers actually teach what was happening in the American Revolution. And we should not forget that. Would I be able to try to show the teachers out there the alignments that I have on this piece of paper?
Sure.
Okay. Now, if you can't read this, you can go to fordthepacklet.com to get the details.
Okay.
Don't forget that Packlet is spelled Pacholet. They go to fordthepacklet.com, they can get all the details for the schools and whatnot, so that they can decide if they'd like to use them in their classrooms.
Wow.
And I don't know if your state would be doing it, but I know that most of the East Coast states, the 13 colony states, are in the process of forming committees for what they call the 250 Commission. In a
Sure.
few years, in the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence will be here, and the 250 commissions in those states are all trying to raise awareness across the state parks and whatnot that are Revolutionary War parks. Raise awareness what happened in their states, and to try to get the school classrooms to begin teaching these local histories and whatnot. I don't know about you. I learned nothing about this. Zero. It did not come up in my history classes. So the only thing I can say is I got a good education and went out and did it for myself.
Well, the thing is, Richard, is that I'm glad that someone is laying it out, and then people can go back and research, do their do their catch up, do their follow up, in these historical events. And you really piqued my interest with a prequel and the book after, because again, to see what happened before, and then to see what happens after, I'm very intrigued to see that and to to correspond that or to correlate that with history, because again, so much of our history is kind of pushed aside or hidden in different layers and stuff like that. And as you stated, I didn't read anything like that in my history books. So, it was just sitting there and someone chose not to put it into, our American history, what was going on. So, thank you for outlining that. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, because what it does is it gives some hope as to now what we can do to change where we were, what we were doing, and how we were doing it.
I agree, and I thank you for that.
Definitely. And so I want to ask Richard, is there I do, you already alluded to the to the books that are coming, to the prequel and to the book after. Anything that you have, putting in the books, here in the next couple of weeks to months?
Oh, okay. Now you cut out there for just a second, so I need you to repeat that question. I'm sorry.
Okay, is there anything that you can allude to in the next coming weeks or months, to where now you have something that's waiting in the wings that you're getting ready to release?
Sure. Well, as far as the prequel goes, we're going to find out that the British Legion was not used to the heat in South
Yeah,
Carolina.
yeah,
So they had coming from all directions. They had unhappy Whigs, and they didn't like the
right,
weather. Now, what that meant for the weather is they were having heat stroke left and right in July of 1780, and they were
definitely,
complaining to the commanders.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Lord Cornwallis, that was in charge of the whole thing, was getting it in letter after letter.
Wow,
Complain,
wow.
complain, complain. Now, as far as the sequel goes, uh,
Okay,
you probably have heard of the swamp fox, Francis Marion.
yeah,
Well, Francis
yeah,
Marion, he was used to the heat. He grew up in the swamps and the heat and the humidity in the lower part of South Carolina, and he gave the British a hard time in 81 and 82. So
yeah, definitely,
those,
definitely.
those are the pre-information that I've got for you.
Good deal, good deal. Well, Richard, I'm so glad that you stopped by our studio, our network, our platform, to express yourself, to talk about your books, and to open up about your life, as it was, or as it is right now. So, in closing, is there anyone that you would like to thank, or any pats on the back or any shout outs that you would like to make at this time before we end our interview?
Well, besides thanking you for having me and thanking
Abs-
Stephen for getting me in touch with you, I'd like to thank John Robertson, the former park ranger at the Cowpens National Battlefield, that's about 11 miles to the north of me, for endorsing my book as historically accurate. The man
Nice.
spent an awful lot of time walking all over these battlefields, all over South Carolina, plotting them, talking about what happened to them for many years of his life. And he
Right.
shared some information with me that's specific to this book.
Good. 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 Well, again, Richard, thank you so much for stopping by. Again, look, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Life Show podcast. and we are on the Life Show Podcast Network. I want to inform you all, those of you that are our continued supporters, that we have some really special things coming up really, really soon. And you guys definitely don't want to miss. So you got to keep it tuned in. You got to stay tuned in. You got to stay locked in to the Life Show Podcast page, because once we release them, only our audience will be able to see what is going on, and everybody else that's being nosy, they'll have to come on a little bit later and see what's going on. But I'll give you guys a hint. Okay. It's the Life Show Podcast revamped. So I'm just putting it out there. Okay. We have some special things that are coming up, and you definitely don't want to miss. Again, ladies and gentlemen, listen, my name is Tyrone Brown Jr. I am your host for the Life Show Podcast Network, as well as our special guest, Mr. Richard Meehan. And he is a published author, historian, and businessman. Again, Richard, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. Look, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting ready to get out of here. You don't want to miss every show that's coming up, because you may miss some information that you need. All right. We are a resource to the community, and we continue to build up our portfolio and our reach beyond Gary, Indiana. Y'all see, even Spain, look, they joined in. We have people from Chicago, all over the world, from Greece, that is joining in on our podcast. And so, look, you want to be a part of the conversation, not just a part of the conversation, but the resources that are coming along with it. Until next time, look, have a great and safe evening. Look, love everybody. Don't hate anyone, because hate, you have to spend more energy than you have to when you love someone. All right. Take care. Have a great and safe evening. Be blessed. Peace.
Here, Tyrone.